Hey everyone. So thanks ever so much for coming to our latest masterclass. My name's Dave Wilkins, founder of SDR Leaders of EMEA. Today we're going to be talking about how to build a criteria of what a good account is. Now, I'm sure I am not the only one who has been, as an SDR manager, just been given a ton of accounts and said, go and book me a meeting. And unfortunately, that still does happen a lot, but there is a way for you as a leader to help your teams in trying to figure out what are going to be the best set of accounts for you to be going after with the data and the insights that you need. So to help us out today, we've got Ed Moore. Say hi, Ed.
Hello, everyone.
That's Ed. He's going to be walking through today and I've gone through the session with him, a really step-by-step way and process how you yourself after this can go and figure out how to find out what the criteria of build that criteria of what a good account is. Now, this session is going to be for 45 minutes today. We wanted to give you the space if you had questions and wanted things clarified to be able to ask those. So if you do have questions, put them in the chat. I'll interrupt Ed as we go through to get them answered for you. But if some of you are feeling more confident, like Roxy, and you just want to butt in and just ask a question as well, I'm sure Ed won't mind that either. So, with that being said, Ed, turn it over to you.
Thanks, David. And yeah, hello again, everyone. Um, just give me a second. There we go. So yeah, just to introduce myself and provide a bit of context. I'm basically one of the co-founders of a company called PGAI, and we do like account intelligence and territory intelligence, to help companies basically find what accounts should we focus on, and then what should we be saying to them when they found those accounts. And something that like when we started out, it was much more like automating research focused. And one of the key trends that we kept seeing is like, how do we decide which accounts we should go and focus on? Because, the way that most people do it is somewhat historic, especially now with everything you can do with AI. So I'm basically what I'm going to go over is like how people do it today and why that's not good. A sort of full step guide of how you can kind of build a criteria to be able to do scoring on accounts, and then some sort of tactical ways that you can operationalize it, either, from a corporate level across the business, or just starting with a small team of testers, so to speak. So the way, as David just alluded to, the way this happens at pretty much every company is it's like, who are our ICP? And for a lot of businesses, that is every company with, over a certain amount of staff, particularly if someone, for business sells enterprise software. And I don't think that that's very helpful in sort of trying to understand which accounts should we go after, because you just end up with a massive list. And what companies normally do is say, how many sellers do we have? How many accounts are there? Divide them up. Okay, they're the accounts that we're going to go after. And it's done on kind of basic firmographic data, like how many employees a company has, or how much revenue they have, or what industry they're in. And of course, those things are important as a absolute baseline, but they don't really give good indicators of, what accounts you should be focused on. And the problem with that is that it then means there's no definitive number around this, but obviously part of the nature of working in sales is you're going to spend a lot of time doing something that doesn't lead to a positive outcome. And it's just a very accepted thing that it's like, we're going to work on these 100 accounts, we'll book meetings with a few of them, and then go from there. But that doesn't, it's not the best way to do it, basically. Um, what an ICP doesn't tell you is like, what companies have priorities and strategies that align with what we sell, or those type of signals that normally, it's like, here are your accounts, AE and SDR. Now you need to go and do loads of research and find out, do they have a competitor, or Do they have some sort of initiative that's relevant to us, or are they hiring people that might be that might indicate that they could need our software or whatever product? It's just a massively overlooked thing, I think, in the industry in general. Mm. One way a lot of people obviously, or a lot of, I think the other thing with it as well, like the way it works today, is the sort of data and signals that people can get to do this is like intent data, for example. And it's always quite vendor led. Like vendor comes up with an idea of how the industry should decide which accounts they go after. And then that becomes the way that people say, oh, we use intent data like someone's been on our website. And obviously that might work in some cases, but if you sell to I don't know, Barclays or Tesco's or a business of that size, just because someone from that company went on your website, unless you know who they are, but even then, it doesn't necessarily indicate that that company are going to spend $1 million or $300,000 on whatever it might be that you sell. So the way we kind of look at it and what we work with companies on in general, if they're using PGI or some companies, if not, it's like starting at the end and working and sort of reverse engineering it to define what actually indicates this is a good prospect for us or a company that's worth spending time on, and then go and find companies that fit that rather than what are the available signals and use those to decide what's good or bad. And so we basically just put together this sort of like process that you can go through and follow um to basically sort of build how this might look for you guys. It's not based on like using our software or using a certain platform or having a certain way of doing things. Obviously, the way people do this is a little bit dependent on what data they already have, what data they can get, because ultimately that's going to be required to build a criteria, but I'll sort of dig into that in a little bit more detail. Um, so before getting to the point of, what's the criteria, I think it's really important to have these things in kind of like have your house in order, so to speak, from use cases, value proposition, like what do we do, what do we sell? I used to work in the recruiting industry, recruiting sellers for software companies, and something that I think is like I think most people are not very good at being like, what do we do? Who do we sell to? Why do they buy it? How's that different in different industries? How should the messaging be different in different industries? It's just sort of like we sell this product. Here are the 3 or 4 pillars that we sell against, and it's like blanket messaging, talk tracks, deal processes. For um, by and large for most people. And it's obviously not possible to identify this is the sort of thing that should go in our criteria, or this is the sort of signal that we're looking for if you don't know, if you're not really clear on what exactly do we do and how does that help businesses at a strategic level, at an operational level, and so on and so forth. Because the whole idea of this kind of method is to identify what are the things that suggest this is a good account for us to go after, and to know if it's a good account to go after and spend time on. Obviously, you would need to be able to say why it is. So, obviously, for some businesses, this is very clear and they have it. What I find is that like when we're talking to companies at PGI about this type of thing, most people are not clear on the vast majority of these things. People can talk about it in the context of, oh, this customer we have used us for this, or here's the things that we, train our team on, but not necessarily like an analysis that's been done across, multiple different customers of here are the actual use cases. And I think something that's really important when doing this type of thing is not to just use the company built standard product messaging unless it's exceptional and really relevant, because most companies build their kind of, messaging and talk tracks and this type of thing based on kind of product and marketing led decisions versus like what actually happens in the field in some cases. So the sort of first step of the process is like, what are the sort of data points that we should look at to be able to say, is this a good account or is this a bad account? And there's not like a definitive, these are the right things or these are the wrong things. It really depends on what you sell, who you sell to, what industries you sell to, so on and so forth. If someone has a if someone sells a database, it's going to be completely different to if someone sells a social media platform. And that's going to be completely different than if someone sells to a specific industry. Um, excuse me. But these are sort of five categories that we think work really well. And I'll go through some more practical examples as we go through this, but the sort of two that I think are most interesting that most companies don't really consider or look at is like the strategic alignment stuff. And what I mean by that is what are this company saying publicly as their priorities and things that they're focused on? And the reason I think that that's so important is that if they have some sort of priority that aligns with what you do, it provides a sort of much wider surface area to be able to potentially book a meeting with the business. When I say that, I'm more so talking about like the bigger the company, obviously the bigger the surface area. But if you look at a company's strategic priorities, you're never going to find a company that have a strategic priority that is directly aligned to what you do. And obviously, there's a process to go through to look at. Let's just say, for example, if a company have a cloud migration strategy or initiative going on, and you sell something that is can accelerate that or make it less reduce the risk related to it. If they do have a strategy like that, they're most likely investing tens or hundreds of $1 millions in and around that topic. So if you sell something and you're trying to do a deal for a few $100,000, there's a much bigger chance of it happening at a company where they have some sort of strategic priority that aligns with what you do than than not, right? And I think that is probably like the most underserved part of any kind of like territory scoring and prioritization that anyone does. A lot of people obviously look at if they post these jobs that are related to what we do, or do they have employee, or do they use a certain technology, which obviously can be great depending on the exact context and company, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're investing loads of money in and around this topic, and so it's kind of makes more sense to book. So it's kind of like looking at it at from a like strategic company perspective and seeing does what we do really match with their top level goals and priorities versus they've posted a job that mentions something in it that's kind of relevant. So, we'll now go and reach out to those people. The other kind of like we call them custom insights, but the other stuff that I think is really interesting that historically you couldn't really get unless you did it manually, but now with AI, it can be done a lot faster, is things like for example, if you sell something to retail where the more stores they have, the better that is for you, then do you want to know how many stores this company has? Or we've got some customers that sell like IoT related software. And so, the more vehicles an automotive company might have, the better prospect they could be. Or the more manufacturing facilities they have, the better it could be. And these are all sorts of things where, like, whenever I ask a company, like, what really would tell you this is a great account to go after, no one, or at least it's not clear, these four things or these categories or whatever it might be. And the way that I would go about this is basically have a brainstorming session with, whoever might be relevant at your company and get together a list, probably that's too long to start with, of all the different possibilities of, if we could know absolutely everything about any and every um, account that we have, these would be the 25, 30 different things that we would want to know about. And start to build that hypothesis of, these are the things that would be relevant to us. Something that happens in pretty much every company is there's these like built-in beliefs that someone said once, or someone had this idea, or maybe it was true at one point in time, that just trickle down through the company. Everyone's told them during onboarding, and they're not necessarily true. For example, we have one customer that sell a database, and they were looking for what are all the different databases that our prospects have, and if they have any of these, then that's a good prospect. But didn't differentiate between here's a database that the account or prospect might have bought 10 years ago versus here's one that they've likely bought in the last year or two. And if a company's bought something new, competitive in the last year or two, it's a lot less likely that you can go with that talk track of, hey, we see you have X, we do Y and Z better, and for for whatever reason. And so the point of this is like you should get as many different data points as possible as a starting point, and then basically move on to like um building that out with a sort of set of accounts, which I'll go into in a second. These are just some like other examples of different data points basically um that we've seen companies use. And again, just to reiterate, I think it's really what whenever we're talking to companies, they're always doing like the same few things, like they're looking at have they posted jobs, do they use what's their tech stack and this type of thing. And obviously like for some businesses, they might be really relevant, for others they might not. And so it's like important to be able to map those um data points or signals to what you do. And to give you some examples of that, there's always these things where it's like, oh, do they have a competitor? Are they using one of our competitors? And of course, like sometimes that can be a relevant signal of, this is a good account. But like if you're selling to a decent size of business, they are most likely going to have a competitor. And if they have a competitor, which competitor is relevant as well, right? Like one of our customers sell a cybersecurity platform. They compete with one company who are probably better than them. The product's better, the business is growing faster, so on and so forth. And they have another company where they probably have a better product than them, and it's a legacy solution. And so, but they're completely different signals, but within the same bucket, right? Of like, do they have a competitor? Another one is like, oh, they've just raised a funding round, or they're hiring someone. And the way I think about it is like, say you guys all have teams, right? If you have a job advert up on LinkedIn for an SDR, that doesn't mean that you're buying new software. And like, or with a funding round, okay, yeah, companies raise funding rounds. They're definitely going to be spending more money, obviously, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be buying, whatever this type of technology is. And
Ed,
obviously,
Ed,
yeah,
sorry to
yeah.
interrupt. So it's had a question come through from Adrian about things being used with Apollo and Zoom Info as one of the filters. Is that what are you recommending that using different data sources from Zoom Info, Apollo, whoever to help you give give you these signals? And then how would you weight them?
Um, I don't I've never used Zoom Info. I've used Apollo though. I always found it to be I mean, before we started building PJI, we were doing a similar thing from like a tech stack perspective, like trying to find, what companies have XYZ technologies. And I always found those sort of more like legacy platforms either wrong or like the really obvious things, where it's like, oh, they have Salesforce or they have HubSpot or they have AWS, and it's not like really that helpful. There's the best way to find a company's tech stack, and there's like different ways you can do this. But I think the best way to do it is to look at their job ads. And like the way we do it in PGI is basically analyze their job ads and count how many times different technologies are mentioned in the job ads. Because obviously, like if a company mentions, let's say for example, if a company's hiring cloud engineers, they are going to mention AWS, GCP, and Azure in every job ad, regardless of if they use them. But if they mention AWS 10 times more than the other two, you'd probably bet that they use AWS. And so it just depends really, like where you can get the data from. And also it's like it also depends on what you sell a little bit, right? Because for some with tech stack, with some people, it's not like, oh, do they have Azure? Because we compete with that. And so, that's um it's more like there's like two levels to, well, there's multiple levels to it actually, but maybe the most simple are competitors. Do they have a competitor? But then obviously there's secondary level to that of, why is that good or bad? Which technologies do we like partner with or play best with? Like some people sell something where like one of our customers has a partnership with Microsoft. And so if a customer uh, has an Azure or a Microsoft, if they're a Microsoft shop, so to speak, then they can buy this company software via Azure, and so it's a lot easier for them to do a deal. So it doesn't like in that instance, it doesn't necessarily make them a better account, but it makes them a better fit for them to spend time on them. Um, but obviously, some people sell certain things where it's like you can't find a lot about what's relevant to them. It depends on the software, right? But like if it's a little bit more niche, then
Okay.
so yeah,
There's another question that came through from Sam about so the question was, would looking at the job descriptions not be quite time consuming on each account? And is there a way that you can do that quicker?
yeah. Um, well, we do it in PGI with the territory stuff. I think, say for example, I think there's some ways in Clay you can do it. I must confess, I'm not an absolute expert in Clay. But I think with a lot of these new automation tools like Clay or Freckle, and there's probably a whole host more, basically there's like several different aggregators, so to speak, of that job ad data where I like fully agree, Sam. I'm not going to sit there and look through job ads. It might be useful to do it to understand if they have a certain technology or not. Is that good or bad? Which I'll come on to in the next couple of slides. But that's the probably the hardest thing about a lot of this stuff. Once you built it, is like, where do we get the data and who's responsible for it? Because some companies from like a corporate level don't care, right? They're like, there's the accounts, you go do the work, that's what your job is, etc. Some they were like, yeah, we're going to spend $100,000 to buy all this data so we can then do the scoring and prioritization so people don't have to do it. So I think it depends a little bit on like what the budget is as well, right? But yeah, you can definitely use Clay and that type of thing. I think the problem with some depends, right? If it's like, has your company bought Clay and you've got tons of credits and someone that really knows what they're doing with it, or is it just you playing around with the free version? Because obviously they're two completely different things. Um, so yeah. Um, I do think with all this stuff though, when if someone was to go through this exercise, and like whenever we do this for our customers, we come up with a hypothesis and then I go and look manually, like, let's go and look at some of their like some of their prospects, job ads and kind of build out a process of if I was doing this manually, how would I do it? And then can we automate that process? Is there a platform for it? Can we just buy the data? Obviously, it depends a little bit on like what the data point is, right? Um, and with all the signals, I think it's really important to have a clear like reason code, we call it, where it's like if they have this signal, what does that actually mean when it comes down to it? Is it if they have this competitor, we can do X, Y, Z for them, which will be good for them because of this. And the kind of best way, especially from like a sales development perspective, to think about it is, like if you couldn't write an email saying, "Oh, I saw you have X," or "I saw you have this strategic priority, and so here's how we can help." I don't think in a lot of cases it's just not really worth doing. And I think with a lot of existing signals that are like mainly pushed by vendors, I don't know if you could email someone being like, hey, I saw you went on our website, product pitch, or whatever or like say going back to the competitors example, if you say, oh, so you have competitor, generic pitch about why we're better than competitors, that's very different to like, I see you have competitor that's a legacy platform, here's the explanation, or I see you have other, more advanced technology, and then maybe don't pitch them actually or whatever. So yeah, I get we actually have been putting together sort of like workbook with like tons of examples of all this type of thing for different industries. So if anyone's interested, I can follow up with that and because I think part of the problem is like just getting a starting point of what should we look at. But going back to what you just asked, David, about how do you score it, it obviously depends a little bit on like what are the data points. If we're looking at a company's strategic priorities, say if someone's doing an analysis of a company's strategic priorities, you might just want to come up with a very simple scoring system of do they have a cloud migration strategy, yes or no? With other things like job postings or how many employees do they have with a certain job title or how many jobs have they posted that mention a certain technology, the way I would recommend doing the scoring is it can't be included unless it's either a number or yes or no to to a question like do they have this technology or do they have a strategy like this? Because if not, then it becomes, it can't be a score basically. And what I see a lot of people doing and what I used to do myself when I was working recruiting is like have a big Google sheet with company names and then a little like notes box where it's like, oh, they posted these two jobs or they did this or they did this. That very quickly becomes unmanageable because you can't say, okay, but which one should I focus on the most? So the way I would recommend doing this is build that long list of potential criteria points and then just go and get the data, depending on what the data is and exactly how you want to do it, obviously is a kind of unique to everyone's criteria. But let's just assume you can get the data, go and get it and just put it in a Google Sheet or CSV or whatever like this, where you would just have the company name, the sort of raw data point, which might be, how many employees do they have with a certain job title, how many jobs have they posted with X, Y, Z. Um, And then you've got a sort of like starting point to test your hypothesis on. Whenever I do this with companies, what always happens is they have a belief, right? Of like if they have this, then that's good for us. And they've got their whole sales team globally going and looking for that as a data point. And then when they analyze deals that they've won or deals that have been in the pipeline where they've won them again, very few of them actually have that data point. And so it's just a completely redundant thing. When you do this on a list of accounts, it's better to do it on accounts where you know if they're a good account or not. Like if they've had a meeting book with them, as well as a list where you haven't. Probably the best like when we do it with companies, we get them to give us 100 to 200 companies where they've closed them, they haven't closed them, they've had them in the pipeline and they want them again, they'd have them in the pipeline and they wouldn't want them again. So that when we go and get the data and do the scoring for them, they already know the answer basically to test like is it actually accurate and better. And I think it's pointless doing this on just a random list of companies because you don't know is this is it correct or not. Um, but once you've decided on the companies and got the data, it's important to do like a somewhat simple data normalization. And what I mean by that is basically like uh, let's say for example. If we wanted to know how many employees a company had where they mention Azure on their LinkedIn profile. Barclays or a company of the size of Barclays are definitely going to have more than a company with 1,000 employees. But if the company with 1,000 employees have 4% of their employees mention Azure on their profile, maybe that's actually a better prospect if that was the data point that you were looking at. So it's important basically to bring all the scores, or, sorry, all of the data points into like a score of between 0 and 100. The way I always do it at least. Um, and there's like some basic formulas you can use to do normalization of the data so that when you look at it, you're just looking at it in comparison to the list that you're working off rather than like what's the total amount of XYZ. Now, that does depend a little bit on the data point because some things is better to know, what percent of their employees um, have a certain job title or mention something on their LinkedIn. With others, it isn't because if you sell something that is directly related to the more stores they've got, the better for us it will be, or the better prospect they would be, then you're just going to want to know the number of stores, right? And I think there's with this whole thing. There's obviously a differentiation between like, are we a good potential software for them and are they a good prospect for us? Because there might be, say if I just carry on with that stores example, there might be a company that have 5 stores and like your software would be great for them. They'd love it. They'd get loads of value from it, so on and so forth. Uh, but the deal would be a lot smaller than this other company where they have 300 stores. And so there's obviously that balancing to do as well, right? Of like, you guys want to bring opportunities where it's not just like, yeah, we booked a meeting, but it's like we booked a meeting with this company and here's the opportunity type. Um, I think to really go into the scoring would probably take longer than we've got. But the way we do it with companies is like once you've got all the data points on all the companies, you then want to strip down some of the criteria points and sort of be like, these ones aren't relevant. This one's going to be too hard to get at scale. And then you can build a sort of simple weighting for each point. So this is like for one of I think it's actually an example from our first customer that did this with us. And what they were really focused on is like how many software engineers or people building technologies does this company have? And historically, they'd just gone after finance because some of their first deals with financial services and they're highly regulated. And so they were like, cool, we'll just focus on finance. And when they then did some analysis, it was like, that actually doesn't translate at all to us doing deals with the company. What really does is what percent of their employees are software engineers because the more software they build, the more potential. It was a cybersecurity company, and it was like the more software they build, the more API endpoints they have, the more potential risk. So that's quite like situational, right? And different for every company, but the idea is like get the criteria, get the data points, and then start to build some sort of scoring model. Um, the other thing on that, and I think this is like a really key distinction that most scoring and like when people are doing account ranking doesn't really take into account, is that it shouldn't be done like this is the best account, this is the worst account, and here's a ranked order of which is best to worst. Because one might be good in one way and one might be good in another way. So, for example, if I go back to that competitor example, it's like one company might have a competitor that is a legacy vendor that you win against a lot of the time. So that can go into this bucket of modernization. Let's say we're gonna focus on these accounts with this sort of messaging and this sort of talk track. And and then there's the other company where maybe they've got one of our competitors that is a much better solution and we don't really win against them, but they've got this strategic priority that that aligns really well with what we do. And so it should kind of be mapping it to like what are your buckets, if you like, or plays, and then doing the prioritization in that way. With a company we did this with recently, they basically wanted to do a completely different kind of set of criteria in all of their different industries because one industry was retail, another was manufacturing. Manufacturing don't have any stores. And so, but whereas retailers do, and that was relevant for them. So then it's like how many facilities do they have? And so the kind of point of doing this is like, well, part of the point is I think for a lot of SDRs, it's like, okay, here are your accounts, go and do a bit of research, and then they have to decide of our products and all these things I can say and all the use cases and case studies, which one should we talk about and which one should I say and which one should I put in an email? Whereas doing this like from the top, you can almost say, here are your accounts. And as a company, we believe these ones should get this type of messaging, these ones should get this type of messaging, and so on and so forth. And I was thinking about this earlier, actually, probably quite an easy, practical way to test this out or get started with it would be like just pick one or two, plays or talk tracks or whatever that maybe align with like an existing sequence or a campaign that you run, and just go and try and find companies that fit in nicely into that or prioritize to find accounts that fit well into that. Because obviously, in an ideal world, your company would want to invest however much money into, buying the data so you don't have to do any of it manually. That's not always the reality. And I think that like it's a lot easier to think about, here's one of our, use cases, let's say. What are the two or three things that would really indicate that that's a good thing for us to that's a good company for us to focus on, and then just go and analyze it against that. Um, and then yeah, I've sort of just said this, and it differs a little bit from company to company, right? And like how much autonomy you have to embed new things and whatever. But I think this is like best done at an operational level, and I don't actually think like AE should be responsible. You know what happens at a lot of companies? It's like AE gets 50 accounts. It's their job to say these are my A, B, and C. They're then like, I'm going to focus on the A's, SDR, here are the B's and C's, you go do that. And there's very little context provided on top of that to like why, which one, etc. And it's always like, let's go after the big shiny ones. And so it doesn't necessarily work. I mean, it obviously can be done by an SDR taking the couple hundred accounts that they're focused on and doing it that way. But I think it really works best when it's like something that everyone's on board with. Um, and yeah, that's it.
Great. Thanks, Ed. We've got a couple of minutes left, so if anybody has any questions, just jump in and ask them.
Hi. I'll lead it. Hi, Ed. This is super helpful. I wrote a little comment during it. I find there's been loads of increased posts on LinkedIn, right, about as soon as you change jobs, everyone kind of emails you and it's taking a mickey out of salespeople. And I get quite a few unsolicited messages of people telling me what software I'm using, and it kind of frightens me slightly. I was wondering how you kind of would suggest SDRs use this information without being like too invasive or getting like lost as well within the masses of other people that are going to go, congratulations on your job change, or you've hired a CEO, or here is all the software that you use. Like, yeah, because I personally switch off as soon as someone says, congrats on this, or you use this software. So
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's all those things like those sort of things like a new job or that type of thing where or they posted a job where I don't know who came up with it in the first place, but it's like if anyone starts a new job, you're not like, great, I've started my new job, I'm spending loads of money on software. And I think doing it, excuse me, from like the way I think about this is it's more like out of 100 accounts, which 20 should be focused on and invest our money in with marketing and SDRs and salespeople, and not necessarily like you are doing this, and so let's talk type of thing. Because I think it's also like, if you put yourself in said person's shoes, it's like, does the CMO of a company or the VP of marketing of a company care about your social media marketing platform just because they posted a job that mentions social media marketing? Like, no, obviously they're going to be hiring people. They're hiring people in every department all year. So I think it's like, I think with a lot of with like this data, you can get it now kind of easily. It doesn't necessarily mean someone should call and be like, "Hey, I saw XYZ. We sell this." Unless there's a really clear like, "You've got this initiative. We've had another company with the exact same thing. Would you be interested in hearing a bit more about how?" I think that could be kind of like, okay, yeah, I would be interested in that. But being like, "You've got a new job. Do you want to buy our software?" Because it's a bit like, you've got a new job. Do you want to buy my software? And it's like, well, why? What's that got to do with anything? And I think that if it's that, if the pitch, so to speak, is like that linear, it's probably not very good. But I think it's just great for people to have the context of it, so that if someone's on a call with, so this is slightly different context, but it's the same point. Like one of our customers used our platform to just do some research on one of their accounts, went to a meeting with a prospect, and the prospect said something that made it relevant for him to say, "Oh, is that related to your green energy initiative?" And they were like, "How do you know about that?" And I think with the way a lot of teams work is it's like, "Oh, we go to get this information so we can say this," rather than we get this information so we're informed, so we can use it as and when it might be relevant, but we're not definitely gonna say it. And it's sort of like the way I think most the kind of like industry-wide standard operating rhythm is like, what's the least amount of information we can get about a company to be able to say something that's like personalized, but it more often than not misses the mark because it's not really like stuff that if you were sitting in their seat, they'd care about. So it depends a little bit around the exact data point, but I would I never like I would never reach out uh, as simply as that, being like, so you post this job and so this.
Definitely. No, I think I agree with that. We're quite limited at our company. Dave knows his, and we moan about it all the time. But we definitely, if we're looking at job changes and stuff too, a good thing on LinkedIn as well is you can see how long they've been in that new role and how long they've been at the company. So more often than not, if we're congratulating someone on a new role, it's someone who's been in that company for a while that probably understands that process, that now has a bit more power than someone who's been 2 months in the company and 2 months
Yeah.
in the role. So I think it's using that and finding if that's the right time and just having it in your mind of you should prioritize that account rather than let me mention it straight away and frighten my poor prospect.
Yeah, exactly.
No, thank you, Ed.
Right, I think we are at time. So Ed, thank you ever so much for that. We will get the recording over to you all on our LinkedIn channel. So make sure to like and subscribe, please. Please, I think that's what they say in those YouTube bits. Beg you. Ed, thank you. Appreciate you, mate. And thanks ever so much for jumping on and asking all the great questions. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks a lot. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Thanks very much. Leonard meetup coming up, or like in person